Welcome to the University of Edinburgh Business School. My name is Rachel Parks. I'm a Business Engagement Manager in our Student Development team. I'd like to welcome you to the school and just give a wee bit of the obligatory housekeeping that no fire alarms are planned. So please, if the fire alarm does go off, make your way out of this room and downstairs and to the Buccleuch Place exit. The school is a triple accredited school. We offer a full suite of taught and research degree programs and offer both open program and bespoke executive education. Perhaps of particular relevance is our MSc in Entrepreneurship and Innovation, and it's great to see some students from that program in the audience. We run a varied program of open events in the school that run throughout the year and bring together sector experts, practitioners, academics, and members of our student body and the wider public. We really value the insights that these joint events bring, and I'm very grateful to Susan Murray, Director of the David Hume Institute, for facilitating this event. Over to you, Susan.
Thanks, Rachel. And thanks to the Business School for hosting us tonight. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. It's such a horrible, dark, wet and cold night, so I'm really pleased that you turned out to hear what will be a fascinating conversation. I'm Susan Murray, Director of the David Hume Institute, which is a think tank set up to increase diversity of thought on the economy and society. And thank you for joining us tonight for this fireside conversation, although I really feel on a dark, wet, cold night we could do with a fire, couldn't we? But I won't be starting one, Rachel, so you don't need to worry. So we'll be recording the session and it will be available afterwards. So anyone that wants to watch it again or share it with friends that couldn't make it along tonight, please do. It'll be on our website and we'll also be sending it out to our mailing list. If you're not on our mailing list, please do let me know and I can add you. So Steven Drost, thank you, Steven, for agreeing to do this tonight. Steven is a two-time entrepreneur, once successful and once failed. He has extensive experience of hiring, building revenues, selling companies, fundraising, and more. He has the scars and the war stories to prove it. He's currently Chief Strategy Officer at Codebase and sees many startups every year. He loves to help grow business, network founders with peers, customers and investors. He's a former trustee of the David Hume Institute and a currently trustee of the Edinburgh Futures Institute. Matt Farrugia is a three-time founder, both technology and commercial experience and early stage tech startups. He's a mentor, fractional advisor for a number of Scottish and international startups and at the pre-seed and seed stages, as well as an experienced podcaster. We are really seeing a reuniting of the Startupification podcast here tonight, which I used to listen to. Tonight we'll hear from Steven about progress on building the ecosystem in the UK, his recent visit to China, speaking in Lingang, have I got that right? And his visiting Shanghai at the World Top-performing Incubator Forum in 2023. And while his head is still fizzing with reflections and lessons learned, we wanted to provide an opportunity to hear his thoughts firsthand. Tonight, Steven is reunited with Matt for the conversation, recreating their successful podcast. So, without further ado, over to both of you.
There we go. Well, it's nice to see you again, Steven. We haven't done this kind of conversation for a while. So for those of you who don't know, we did a podcast. It was not a particularly serious podcast. It was just basically two people talking about their experiences in technology. I think this is kind of the same sort of vibe today. You are recently back from your trip to China. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about the context? Why were you in China? Where did you go? Start there so we can kind of understand.
Yeah, so thanks. So I turned 50 on the 22nd of November. Alessandro was there. I was actually close to me at that point. I was going to go to Finland to go to an event called Slush, actually with University of Edinburgh. And on the day of my birthday, I was asked by the Chinese government, "Hey, do you want to come to Shanghai?" And no, it was a special present. No, it was entirely coincidental, and in a fit of a kind of midlife crisis, I said, "Yep, absolutely, I'll go." And I thought I'd go. At Codebase, we've had many Chinese delegations to visit over the years. So yep, thought it'd be good to return the visit, so to speak. It was all paid for, so highly incentivized to go. originally thought I was going to go just to sort of visit and be part of a wider event, but on the way there was then asked, where's your keynote and how many panels are you going to work on and all this kind of stuff. So it became very, very serious very quickly. Again, Alessandro witnessed me fretting in Finland, trying to write stuff really quickly. And then went to Shanghai and spent about 10 days there. And I really stress, I'm not an expert on China by any stretch of the imagination. This is really just a kind of report of a trip. And perhaps the interesting thing, hopefully, is the stuff I saw in Shanghai or the event I was part of or spoke at, etc., is very much about the kind of stuff that we do here in Scotland with Codebase, so we can talk about what that looks like exactly.
Okay, so to cut to the chase, that you think, having visited China, there's quite a lot going on in China that's relevant to what we're doing here. There's a lot of similarities, etc. But before we talk about similarities, can we just talk for a second about China and the differences a little bit? So I had never heard of Lingang, which I believe is a special area, a pilot free trade zone outside Shanghai. Can you give us any more information about that? Is that all you know about it?
No, I can try and set the scene. So, and it's also one of the sort of really interesting things. There's an old kind of trope in the startup world called the build it and they will come. And that's normally a really bad thing to do. It's that you have some kind of top-down wishful thinking that if you build something, if you just do it, and then magically people will sort of come and come along. So going to Lingang, Lingang is an area just outside of Shanghai. It's about 30 minutes drive away from Shanghai to the southeast. And the area in Lingang covers, it's roughly the size of Singapore. And you can see how sort of artificial the place is. So there's a circular lake, which Matt has told me now.
They call that the Ring of Glory.
The Ring of Glory Lake. Mm-hmm. And you can perhaps see by the straight lines of the coastal area, it's all pretty much man-made. So that's the area. You can see how far it is from Shanghai. And to go back to the building, there will come a moment, some of you might have investigated like ghost cities on YouTube or cities that are built in China, kind of, a huge, massive kind of infrastructure investments where, no one really goes there. And Lingang's probably on the cusp of that. It's an ecosystem that's been built to attract, I guess, deeptech, and we can talk about what deeptech is as well later on. Deeptech startups to the region to build something that's super ambitious. So the comparator is always Singapore. They always want to build a kind of second Singapore, build stuff to incentivize startups to go there, to build a new kind of ecosystem around it. That was kind of the context, the backdrop against which the Chinese government had invited lots of different guests. So I was there with people from Chile, from Portugal, from France, from Spain, from all sorts of different countries, from Italy. And basically we were all telling our stories about what does our ecosystem look like.
Okay, so this is a sort of Chinese state attempt to do a pseudo Silicon Valley type thing, be more open to outwards technology companies coming into China. Is that
trying to say to people, hey, look at all the infrastructure we've got here. Your company could be there, your flat could be there, your apartment could be there,
right.
your kids could go to that kindergarten, etc.
And this is the context. I mean, like, one of the things about China is China is not a closed book. Like, we do know some of what goes on in China, but I'm not sure most people day to day in Scotland know that much about the Chinese economy or the Chinese tech ecosystem, which is pretty massive. I mean, economically, China is in a bit of a more tricky state that it's been for a while. I mean, Evergrande today have been forced into liquidation. They owe something like $300 billion worth of debt.
Yeah, and that's real estate, just to...
Yeah, so I think about a quarter of the Chinese economy is real estate, dominated by two major companies, and it was going very well and has gone gradually much less well over recent years. And just the overall macro picture is that China, which was growing its GDP at ferocious rates, that growth has slowed to, I think, 5% last year, predicted to be 4% this year. I think 25% youth unemployment. So all is not rosy in the world of the Chinese economy, although it's still clearly massive and growing in a way that a lot of Western economies would be excited about if they could do the same. So is part of this ecosystem building, do you think that's a reaction to that, or is that independent, or where are we sitting?
I think it's independent, but I think, the people I spoke to in China were very clear about the fact that they've got a bunch of challenges. So I think it's independent, and because a lot of this stuff had been built a while ago, I would say 10 years ago or so. So on the one hand, it's parallel, but it's probably heightened right now. The main driver they had was to try and, so this is something that really surprised me. There's a startup investor thinker called Peter Thiel. Some of you might know Peter Thiel. He wrote a book called 0 to 1. So Peter Thiel was one of the co-founders of PayPal. He built Palantir. Is a big investor, billionaire guy now, and is perceived, or probably is, a quite sort of hardcore libertarian, sort of to the right of many. He put a lot of money behind Donald Trump, things like that. And one of the things he emphasizes a lot is how he thinks, there's China are the enemy of the US, and it's pretty hardcore in his opinions against China. And one of the things that really kind of blew my mind, to be honest, when I got to China, was that everyone referenced Peter Thiel a lot, but in a positive way, in a way where they kind of respected him a lot. And what surprised me is, so the language he uses in 0 to 1 is to say, startups are 0 to 1. They're things that don't exist, and then they do exist, and they are different, therefore, to companies that are 1 to 2 or 3 to 4, or etc. So it's like starting brand new things instead of growing existing things, and that both of those need completely different playbooks and completely different ways of thinking about them. And what really interested me was to see that the constant explanation I had in China was, people would say to me, hey, we're really bad at 0 to 1, and we're really good at 1 to 10, 10 to 100, 100 to a million. That's what China does well. And in Europe or wherever else the people were there visiting from, you guys are really great at 0 to 1. So if you can incentivize your 0 to 1 companies to come here, we can help things scale and do that. So that was kind of the narrative that was being driven. And again, it surprised me a lot because of the Peter Thiel angle. It surprised me that was the key metaphor they were using to explain things. But it also was, how does a British company, a Scottish startup, how do you actually go to China? What does that look like? Who are they looking to incentivize to go over? Within that then, the bit that also sort of surprised me, I'm just pretty ignorant to the situation, is that I met a lot of Chinese people who had been to university in Britain, and they were all really happy to, reconnect with the UK in different ways. So those were the kind of building blocks. So build this big thing, build it and they will come. Probably not that many people have come. It's huge. I mean, it's gargantuan. Earlier, Susan was asking me for some images, and the images just don't do any justice. If you take like stuff on your phone, it's just so small. It's really like Google Maps territory. So that entire space, again, slightly bigger than Singapore, full of buildings and artificial lakes and all this cool stuff. But no one there really, not really anyone there. So what does that look like? How can they incentivize people to go over? I think that was the point of the event I was visiting.
One of the sort of mantras, I think, you're in the ecosystem world more than me, but I would have thought one of the mantras of ecosystem building was, how can you create homegrown talent to generate and produce the next wave of successful technology companies? Is that doesn't really sound like what you just talked about. It sounds like a sort of foreign direct investment type play. But
yeah, indeed. So I think those efforts do exist there, but they're again predicated on trying to grow the talent that can help you get from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, rather than from 0 to 1. And I'm like half German, half Scottish, and one thing that really, I'm sorry, I sound like this person who's been on a gap year, is coming back with all this great wisdom. But one thing that really impressed me was, I think I bought into a kind of mythology that in Europe we're super creative and in China it's not the case. But I don't know if that's true. Another thing that I saw there, so for example, there were people there from McGill University, and they were talking about what McGill University was doing. A Canadian university, and the deep tech efforts and the kind of stuff they were building, the things they were focusing on. And I think you'd be hard pressed to tell a difference between McGill and Edinburgh. They're trying to cure cancer, they're trying to, build solutions for climate change. They're trying to, all those kinds of things. And I think everyone in the world's kind of doing that, including China. So I wasn't really sure on, is it actually true that they're not that great at 0 to 1? But it surprised me to hear people say, hey, that's what we're not good at, therefore we're trying to incentivize people to come over. Our incentives, or the structures we're trying to build for our own ecosystems, are all about creating the structures that can onboard that 0 to 1 thinking, and will give you all the ways to scale from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, etc.
I mean, there are plenty of big Chinese technology companies. I mean, if you look at Tencent and Alibaba and, JD.com, Huawei, I mean, you can probably make a list of American big tech companies that we're all familiar with and kind of think they're global leaders. And there are mostly a column of Chinese versions of those companies, and they must be jam-packed full of smart, innovative people.
I totally agree, but all I can say is what I kind of encountered. So I visited like 3 universities, I think, and again, the mantra from most of the sort of deep tech researchers I met all said, hey, I spent 5 years in Oxford, or I did my PhD in Glasgow. I met a whole bunch of people. So yeah, maybe it's a kind of badge of honor. Maybe it's the only connection point they had with me, so they were being nice about that, etc. I think you're right. I think there is a parallel, or there's an equivalent. Again, I'm calling into question my own intuitions before I went, thinking that, hey, maybe we're super. The last cool thing we've got in Europe is that we're really creative. What worries me, there's a metaphor for Europe that people might have heard, and Alessandro, forgive me if we discussed this for hours, is that Europe's a museum. And what does that look like? Is Europe a museum? Are we still innovative? What's it like to innovate within a museum? Where do we stand? And wherever China is, it's not a museum. So that was one of the things that kind of really impressed me and made me think about how can we build stuff that is somehow commensurate or somehow can be connected.
I mean, it's a super sort of tedious trope to say this, but you can kind of go around the world, or certainly you can go around Europe and say, look at all these countries trying to create their own version of Silicon Valley, and sometimes they call them Silicon something local, right? Yeah. Is that basically, is that a Europe sickness? Is that a world sickness? Are China doing the same thing? Like if you were to compare ecosystem building in China compared to Europe, I think, and you correct me if I'm wrong, I think you could characterize Europe as everyone's trying to recreate that bottom-up magic, and they're on some level of acceptance that that's impossible to do, and just wind it back to something that's a bit more practical. Is that just the same game that's going on in China, or is there something different going on with ecosystem building?
Let me define ecosystem building a little bit to answer that. So I think ecosystem building essentially is understanding what the building blocks of an ecosystem are, and they're roughly startups, the state, academia, big business, so corporations, incumbent existing corporations, and investors, effectively. And there's maybe even sort of city, town planning, or some kind of property development angle as well. But it's those 5 or 6 of key components against which people define new ways to create new companies, new jobs, new wealth, new kind of economic development. And I think we're all kind of engaged in that, independently of where we are in the world. It's just what's the scale and what are the bits we have. So if you speak to someone from Chile, for example, they'll go on and on about how great lifestyle is and how cheap things are, and developers are kind of fungible and it doesn't really matter where you live and you can do some cool stuff. Other parts of the world have different stories where they'll, index on one thing over the other. They'll say, hey, we've got brilliant programs for investors, or we've got brilliant human talent, or we've got great weather, or we've got nice food, or whatever it is, or lots of large companies who can become the first customers of the startups, or et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's just a kind of metaphor to describe the way new company building works. And so I'm bought into ecosystem building as a kind of key concept to stand behind. I think it's just different from country to country where you throw your chips and where you try to incentivize people to come to you versus what you're trying to do. So I'm not quite sure. I think China's doing the same thing. I had one sort of memorable moment where it's a slight tangent, but it's related. at Codebase, we run a government, Scottish government contract called Tech Scaler, which essentially is about creating a piece of infrastructure to help new companies come about, and that's via some space, some educational programs, some kind of community building and mentorship. And I kind of described that to a bunch of people in China, and they said, "Oh, that's the Chinese system." Where you've got,
Except they build 120 square kilometers worth of city.
exactly, but they've got the key idea that the state has a kind of minimalist intervention piece that says, "Here, we're gonna put some money into trying to help this happen." And around Europe, it's very similar. So there's a person like me working for a company shaped like Codebase, delivering a contract shaped like TechScaler for their space. Interestingly for me, it's always roughly the same kind of amounts of money. So it'll be, a few million a year to try and do that. It'll be the same people they hang out with. So they'll go and talk to a university, they'll go and talk to, normally a bank or a telecoms company in the country. And then you'll try to create a bunch of ecosystem building blocks to encourage more startups to come about. Now, you can be super communitarian and think that's an awesome thing to do, or you can be libertarian and go, that's all nonsense. It has to be a much more Darwinian kind of...
I know which one Peter Thiel would pick.
Yeah. Well, so it's such a difficult question. Honestly, if you go down it, if you look at, so I was recently in Germany, and there's like the biggest Tesla building thing in Europe, I think, there. And it's all because of tax incentives by the German government. So you even got like, people who want to go to Mars will still take German taxpayers' money to build a thing to create jobs in Germany. So I think it's a really difficult one. I think it's just like how it's described. I'm not really sure where the chips fall, so to speak. But the thing I thought was interesting was that from a European perspective, if we're building ecosystems, and again, I saw this in Finland, so Slush is like the biggest kind of startup conference type thing, and I would say easily over half, probably more, of the exhibitors there were state agencies looking to build new companies. And I think that's just a legacy moment of what we have in Europe. I think the wealth we generated in Europe, a lot of it was colonialism, a lot of it was like, East India Company and like sending ships and guns and, and building wealth that way. And subsequently, it's just not like that. We've got a bunch of legacy. My crazy, scary stat is like the last time a European company joined the list of the 100 biggest European companies was 42 years ago. So we just don't build new stuff. Like it just hasn't. There's no British Google or French Amazon or etc. So
it's a bit pessimistic, isn't it?
No, it's not. It's just true. Right?
Just a fact.
It's what it is. But I think our kung fu in Europe is the way you get out of that. And interestingly, it's for like right-wing governments and left-wing governments, is you create ecosystem building agencies somehow that try to create the conditions whereby these things can thrive. And that's done with a bit of money, a bit of mentorship, connecting people, all those different bits.
If we can talk about technology for a minute, because if you look at the sort of recent waves of technology, obviously mobile was a big wave. And interestingly, China did mobile kind of different, and in some ways did it more aggressively, penetrated much more into daily life. I know you were impressed with WeChat when you were there. Yeah. Tell us about that for a second, but I also want to ask about what you think will happen with AI. But talk about what mobile's like in China as a person who's used to mobile here.
Yeah, so I know Natalie's here, so you're going to laugh at me here. So my hot take of 2024 is that WeChat's amazing.
Wow. And have you heard of TikTok?
But so WeChat is essentially, if you look at it, it looks kind of like a version of WhatsApp, like just a messaging tool. And if you stay within it, it pretty much just does that. So it's like you can send each other messages, you can send images, you can watch videos, and that's kind of it. But once you connect it to the rest of the world, or the rest of the sort of Chinese world around you, it becomes incredibly powerful. It's like having a kind of everything app. So it's a payment tool. It's if you go to a restaurant, you can scan a QR code and you get like really beautiful menus and things to choose from, and it's really well done, interactive, and you can. So you've got this kind of, I think it's what Elon Musk thinks X or X-Twitter should be, that you've got this kind of, where you can, talk to people, pay for things, open your door, start your car, all in one kind of app. And WeChat was super impressive to experience, just to see the front door of WeChat is this ugly clone of WhatsApp, but then it turns into this beautiful sort of device of where you can just do, like navigating the country was so easy with WeChat and really hard.
I don't suppose you know the answer to this, but is there a cultural reason why an everything app would take off in China in the way it hasn't in the West?
So again, I'm not an expert on this. I'm just confused about that. So one of the things that blew my mind in China is that you've got like plugs. They've got different plug systems in one country. So it's completely chaotic in a sense, and completely non-top down and non-planned and all these kind of things you would, at least I coloured my mind when I thought of China. So it's pretty chaotic. So I don't know, Matt. Maybe the X thing will work. I don't think so personally, but for sure, WeChat is like, if you don't, it would be hard to live without WeChat in China.
So we live in a world which is sitting on the edge of, or maybe on the edge of AI, generative AI becoming extremely important to everybody's lives. What do you think, what do you see as the role of, let's say, the US, which we can predict pretty easily, Europe, we'll just put in a bucket and we'll include us in Europe and the UK, and then China. Where's the positioning between those? Because that's probably the next great frontier, isn't it, in technology?
Yeah. So I don't know. I used to, not being clever clogs or anything, I used to put it in those boxes as well. But I had two sort of experiences that made me question that a little bit. So I was recently in last September I was in Silicon Valley, and just through a complete coincidence I was in the vicinity of a lot of people who work for OpenAI, who make ChatGPT. And the thing that surprised me was how many European accents you hear. So there's so many European people building OpenAIs off the chart. I mean, there was just German accents, French accents, etc. And especially French, was huge amounts of French people. So I think maybe we have a reality where there's a thing in America being built, and if you look at the OpenAI story, it was open, and then it was closed, and then Sam Altman was fired, then he's back. So there's a kind of soap opera type thing around that. So it's a genuinely very fast moving kind of thing. I don't really know what their politics are really, genuinely, but I know it's peopled by lots of Europeans. My worry would always be there's a kind of brain drain, like the smartest European people are sort of leaving Europe because they can't see what is the European thing, what's the LLM, as an example, what is that aspect? Whereas in China, they're building a completely different AI world that's much more, this goes really down rabbit holes of, insider knowledge, not deeper knowledge, but it's less text-based, and they're looking at different sort of approaches and trying to sort of, I met a whole bunch of people from Africa while I was there as well. I wonder, I think France is trying to build a kind of French sort of.
Yeah, they're doing okay. Mistral is not doing too badly on the global scene.
So I don't know if we're gonna build that thing. I don't know if it's that tripartite bit about there's America here, which is more or less sort of freedom focused or whatever. Then you've got a European version, and then a more closed Chinese thing that will go to countries that can't afford to build their own. I just don't know, man. I'd be hazarding a guess, but I do know that they're really interested in AI, and again, but I met like 4 people or so who'd been to UK universities to study computer science at that level and went back to China to build AI solutions. So
yeah, one of my sort of personal bugbears about, I'm not so sure I'd say Europe, but certainly the UK's position around AI is that we seem to be bending over backwards to be the very best takers of technology rather than necessarily trying to lead in terms of being makers of technology, although that's not true or fair when it comes to DeepMind or even Stability AI. But do you have a position on that? Like, China now are the great makers of everything. So are they also the great makers of technology alongside America? And where does Europe fit in terms of what the next great set of makers of technology?
I don't know. I think so. Again, if you look at WeChat, it's a cobbling together of Snapchat and WhatsApp and messages and Instagram and a bunch of stuff. So I think that's more of a mosaic of different influences put together in a cool way that kind of works. And I guess you could then look at TikTok and say, that's the next iteration of like a super powerful, social engineering tool almost of like, dissemination of memes and ideas and
it's certainly leading edge. It's not like TikTok are copying other people's features.
That's what I'm saying. It's an iteration on the WeChat thing. It looks like sort of cobbled together versus the pristine kind of piece there. And again, it's totally taken over. Like not taken over, but it's like it's gone viral here, and like lots of people obviously use it. So I think that's a hard reality. I think there's still American stuff where that's happening too. I don't know if there's a European version. I don't see one really. I think maybe also these things happen in waves and times. So there's a bunch of stuff you can do at a certain time, and then later on, it's maybe harder to do. It might come back, but a maker of technology, is the German soul speaking here. Is like, if you say you win the lottery or something, you might want I don't know. I was going to say a German car. You probably don't even want a German car anymore. You want German windows and doors.
Pretty soon you're going to want a Chinese car, aren't you? Well, I mean, their EV numbers are absolutely massive.
Possibly. But I just think the European offline prowess is... So in China, the last European hurrah is, it's all about, Fendi and LVMH and Chanel and those kind of like power brands, Burberry, all this kind of stuff. You've got that everywhere. Other European stuff, education maybe, education and cool fashion brands.
Yeah, you've talked about education a couple of times. I mean, there's that is definitely still seen. Well, I don't know if it's seen, but the numbers would suggest that UK education is still prized in China. I think the number of Chinese students in the UK last year was 152,000. Across undergraduate and postgraduate, and that's substantially up like 44% in the last 5 years. So it's a massive growth sector in the UK. Is that just back? I mean, what would you put it down to? Or when you spoke to people, did they talk about that? Does it come up?
I'm going to anchor the answer very much on one conversation. Right?
Okay. What did that one person say?
Yeah, so I met this guy on the flight over from London who was studying maths at Clare College, Cambridge. And he was annoyingly young. He was 18 and was already in second year. He was this sort of like super genius guy, and he was telling me all about his college. And he had the whole regalia. He had like the hoodie and the jacket and he had socks. Everything was Cambridge branded. And he kind of told me that he reckoned like a bunch of his. Well, he told me that a bunch of his lecturers were Chinese, and he reckoned there was a university. I'm so sorry, I don't know how to pronounce it. I can't remember the name. In Shanghai, that was actually better at maths than Cambridge. But his big plan in life was to graduate and stay in Cambridge and become a lecturer. So, there's a whole bunch of incentives people have. There's a whole bunch of ways of seeing the world that might not just be about those kind of boxes and categories. I think he was incentivized to do so because there was still some kind of cachet and still some kind of perceived thing. Actually, I've got a second anecdote. There's a guy I met who worked for a Chinese car company, and he told me that he drove a BMW. And I said, I said to him, I was like, oh, my dad would be really happy to hear that. And why? And he was like, I don't know. And you just wouldn't go further than that. He was like, I don't know. I guess it's some kind of status thing. People are people, and the exotic might just still be a thing. But yeah, the what's the European edge on this? I think education still prized. Who knows for how long? I don't know. I think, again, it's that 0 to 1 question again. I wonder if we're as creative as we think we are, or I wonder if their universities as great as we think they are. But that was definitely still there, and clothes for sure. So, I never really see people wearing like luxury brands in Edinburgh. I don't really, but like you would see it there all over the place.
So it's a bit uncomfortable, this whole come to the UK to get your 0 to 1 thinking education. But do you think that's what is going through the heads of people who are committing to come here? And are we? What can we do more to deliver that? I mean, I'm not sure we're that great at 0 to 1 thinking in the Peter Thiel sense.
That's my thing. That's what I'm so worried about. I was sort of taking those thoughts for a walk in my head, thinking, are we that good?
Well, not in the Peter Thiel sense, but maybe in the sort of creative sense, maybe.
Well, I've spoken to a bunch of people who are professors and lecturers and stuff, and researchers since I came back from that, and they do tell me, no, we are good at that. We are still good at that, and we are better, and blah blah blah. And that is an actual value. But yeah, I think I don't know. I think I try to be, one of the things we try to sort of inculcate in Codebase is to be outward looking, and another thing to sort of raise is the world's talking about World War III and stuff like that more now than I can remember, and there seems to be like a kind of all the questions you asked, like was there the US AI versus the Chinese AI and European voice? Is there a European voice, taker maker of technology? I think the thing I'd love to get across that I was struck by how kind the people were in China. I met really nice people, and there's been tons of follow-up. So actually you're joining me. We're going back to China in May and probably in September as well. There's been loads and loads of invitations. Again, what we're trying to do at Codebase is be an ecosystem builder for Scotland. And what struck me again was that is seen as the Chinese way in China. So there's an ongoing conversation about, can we build ecosystems together and all these kind of things. So that's the kind of stuff that gets me excited about, bringing positivity or optimism. Like, there has to be some kind of, the older I get, like, you have to be optimistic almost. It's not, sometimes it strikes me like that venture capital types or libertarian types in the US think that if you're not optimistic, you're just bad at maths somehow. You don't understand infinite upside or something, you're an idiot. But I'm trying to be like a moral optimist and say, we have to sort of connect. We're all working on the same stuff roughly. Is there a way of bringing these things together through, it might be ridiculous, but through entrepreneurship?
Is that genuinely it just seems to me sort of mind-boggling. Let's say that I'm just making this up, but the Codebase remit, let's say it was to create 1,000 startups, entrepreneurial startups in Scotland, some proportion of which will go on the venture journey, right? Is there some version of you in China whose remit is to create 10,000 startups who are all going to be like capitalist entrepreneurs? That's just mind-boggling to me. I had literally no idea that's what.
Yeah, no, there for sure there is, for sure. And again, another interesting thing to point out. I'm loath to say this, but Shanghai is not a startup city, right? So people told me again and again and again, it's a historically sort of grown city, but there is startup activity there. But it's other parts of China that are perhaps more pronounced sort of ecosystems for startups. So even within China, there's sort of competition between the different places and how people sort of state their place or what that culture piece looks like. But I just think there's an opportunity to do more together rather than not. And again, we're trying to build stuff in the States as well. We're trying to connect things. So on Peter Thiel, for example, what kind of blew my mind. So I honestly admire Peter Thiel's intellect. I think he's one of the smartest dudes in the world. But his politics are pretty, it's not my thing. And he'll again go on and on about how there's a cold war with China and Google. He's on record saying the Google founders should be tried for treason and all this kind of stuff. At the same time, when I was in China, I found out, and I didn't believe this, but it turns out it's true. I've looked into it. Peter Thiel was the first investor into DeepMind, which is the backbone of Google's AI, and is a British startup. So there are weird kind of connections all over the world of things that look like sort of against each other on paper, but actually can find ways of coming together. So for me, what we're trying to do is trying to create some kind of voice for this ecosystem and say, we've got super smart people here. We've got really, one of the great things about Scotland is you've got, free education for now, if you're Scottish, so that the smartest people can be exposed to like the highest learning kind of for free. That creates a kind of, massive reservoir of human capital that's really, really well educated. And so what can we do with those people? Can you at least motivate some of those people to build companies and build new things? Because the typical thing of like, I think universities maybe created a whole bunch of people who can do research and then a whole bunch of people who could become awesome employees at existing incumbent companies, I think that second bit is kind of really imperiled, and we need to build new things.
And do you think people from Scotland should be going to China to build companies?
I think there's a trick to see, again, just based on, and this was like many people, I've showed you some of the emails since returning. I think there's something that we could do with the Chinese students who come to Scotland and study and then kind of leave and go back to China. There'd be something that could be done with those people here that can connect back to there. But I think that's something that could be interesting, not just for China. I mean, for India, for example, that could be the case as well. But that kind of, how do we connect things? How do we, what are we otherwise in Europe? Are we just some place where people come, see the Eiffel Tower?
Get a status education and then disappear again.
Yeah, get some education, eat some food, buy some clothes or something, then just go away again. So that's the bit that kind of, maybe I'm trying so hard not to be pessimistic on this, but that would be my kind of worry for Europe.
Because the Chinese as a market, the Chinese market is absolutely huge. I think, ByteDance, the TikTok people, their revenues are $110 billion last year. I mean, that is absolutely enormous by any measure, apart from potentially Apple. But, that market seems to be completely inaccessible to people from other countries. Is it inaccessible, or are things happening there?
I think so. I think it's inaccessible.
So there has to be some sort of connections and bridges into China to do that.
I met a bunch of VC people, and I think Chinese money stays in China.
Right. Okay. But maybe more so Chinese money is coming out of China to invest in other parts. I mean, we know here in Scotland that's obviously been a story relatively recently.
For sure. Yeah, in that direction, for sure. I just meant like early companies trying to go into China. I think that'll be a tough one.
Okay, cool. Well, we're going to open up for questions. Is there anything else you want to say before we open up for questions?
No.
Overall, you enjoy China?
I loved it, and really looking forward to it.
What was the most surprising thing?
Most surprising thing? WeChat, to be honest.
WeChat?
No, just to see how connected all that kind of technology bit is, because we just...
Welcome to 2015.
Yeah.
Right, anyway, so if people have questions to ask Steven or myself, we'd be more than happy to take questions. If anyone's got experiences dealing with China, doing business in China.
That's so painful.
Go on, there's the first question. I think we have to bring a little microphone so that it can be heard on the video. This person over here.
Hi, I've got two questions. First one's a sort of more, in a way, wide one is, there's been a lot of discussion about ethics in relation to Chinese practices, and I just wonder how that features in the whole thing, because there have been apparently quite a lot of examples of China stealing intellectual knowledge from the West and then use it for their own purposes. And it seems to me that's potentially a difficulty around collaborative ventures, because they're a lot bigger than us, and they do have a track record of doing that. So I wondered what your thoughts are about that. And the other one is just an interesting one, is, are women anywhere in technology in China?
Women? Yeah, okay, thanks.
So which one do you want to take first?
I'll do it in the order. So again, for me, I look at this also with a German hat on, and in that area in Lingang, there was Fraunhofer Institute, there was BASF, all these big German sort of things were present, and I met a bunch of German people there, and they all kind of said, we're here because we can't do stuff in Germany anymore. It's just too much, all the usual sort of
manufacturing or research or what?
The whole thing, like, it's just red tape, there's not enough people, we don't have enough energy, that's the big problem. That the UK kind of has too, but there's not such a big manufacturing thing in the UK, so we don't really notice it yet. But Germany's like, just switched off the last nuclear power plants and has got the biggest chemical industry in Europe by far, and just can't power it anymore. So I take your point that there is industrial espionage, and again, like the German solar photonics industry was like just wiped out by China. But I think the the prevailing thing now, and again, I'm not an expert at all, is if you can't beat them, join them kind of thing. So I think there was a huge presence of, again, big traditional German companies there, rebuilding like whole cities and factories and stuff. So I think that ethics piece has led to maybe a kind of first mover advantage rethink rather than doubling down on IP. So that would be the first part. Women in tech, yeah. I saw many. It was yeah. So again, I don't want to come across as an expert opinion on this. It was just like observations.
Like 50-50 at the conference you're at, or
No, but it wasn't in any way different to the UK. So there were not as many, but there were still a significant amount. So one of the key people at the university, the sort of technology transfer office, was run by this hardcore kick-ass woman who was, one of the most sort of impressive people I met there. And the company she introduced us to was maybe like 20 or so, and I would say 6 or 7 were female founder-led. So yeah, there was activity. Yeah.
in terms of this sort of, you said if you can't beat them, join them type thing, but that's not true for technology just now, is it? I mean, like America's choking off access to advanced AI chips, and to China. So they're kind of like, if you can't beat them, maybe just do something that's anti-competitive so that they can't keep up.
Yeah, I would just be, it's above my pay grade. Like, I'd be speculating. All I can say is I met a bunch of people there from well-known, august, long-standing institutions. They were all there, and they were all, doing that 1 to 10 to 10 to 100, 100 to a million thing.
Yeah, and although I'm sure that's definitely been the case in many industries, ironically in semiconductors, it's still a Netherlands company who seems to have the absolute bolt on the IP around the lithography process. So I don't quite know how they do that, because given that so many things are manufactured in a place that they can't really get control over, but there are still some aspects, things going on in the world. It'll be interesting to see what happens in AI. I think that's the real thing, because obviously the Chinese AI situation is radically different, not least of all because of their will or their desire to control the outputs of some of these models is completely different than in America. So we shall see. Any other questions? Yep, there's a question at the back.
Thank you so much. I have 2 questions also, and the first one is talking about how China has been able to build up resilience and innovate despite constraint. The first one that I can remember is the one regarding the space project, and they're able to come up with theirs. They had the Android limitation, and then they're able to come up with theirs and be able to compete in the global market. You have been to China. I want to ask, what are the systems in place that has been able to make China navigate all these constraints and still innovate? As a sense of innovation here in this business school, I'm somewhat interested in how organizations, how companies, how nation innovates despite constraint. And my second question is regarding the recent developments in BRICS. As an African, the second question regarding BRICS. Yeah. As an African, my country, Nigeria, is trying to enroll and then subscribe to join the union. It is good. They have the positive side, but I'm concerned that such union will not really develop or create the platform for growth in my country that is currently suffering from unemployment, because we get cheap goods. And from my knowledge of economics, the more we import, the more we get more unemployment. So what is your take on imports increasing unemployment and affecting industrialization?
Sorry, those are.
So do the BRICS one first. Do you have an opinion on the BRICS? I mean, clearly, I don't know how. We're not experts, economic experts, but I know that there has been some concern in, I guess, some of the new entrants to BRICS about the dominance of China and in that relationship. So I guess for people like Nigeria, you're coming into a union with I don't know how dominant China is across in terms of GDP versus the other BRICS nations, but it must be fairly dominant. They also have lots of influence elsewhere via the Belt and Road Initiative. So do you have anything to say about that other than
Those are really good questions, but I'm so sorry, I just don't know the answer.
In terms of the constraints one, so you say, how do you innovate with constraints in place? I didn't quite catch what you thought the constraints in China were. So just repeat what you think the constraint is against innovation in China.
Oh, the constraint was during the space project, the US, they were like sanctioned from not participating in it. And China was like relegated, okay, no, get out of the space project. And they was trying to confirm the name of their own project and also the Android issues that they had with the iOS, with the OS. And then before we knew it, within few months, 6 to 7 months, OI was able to come up with an operating system. So despite all this constraint, I feel that the more you give China constraint sanctions, the more they innovate. So what is the system in place that make them innovate despite constraint?
So I honestly can't give you a clever clog's answer. A very good friend of mine, a school friend, works for the European Space Agency, and his constant complaint is that, so he's a German-Russian guy, and German-Russian people will tell you all day long that the Kalashnikov, AK-47, and the Soyuz rockets are like timeless design classics, and that they're the best things in the world, and they're the smartest people and all that, and that the technology to take you to, put satellites above us is essentially 1950s technology, and no one's innovated and blah, blah, blah. So I don't think that much was, again, this is embarrassing for me to even attempt to answer this question, but I just don't think that much was needed if I talk to my friend. So
you think it's not a 0 to 1 problem? You think it was more a 1 to 100 problem,
Yeah.
and that's what China excels at?
It's business model stuff and scale and stuff like that. That would be the European thing, is like, we don't, if you talk to anyone, so he's the guy does rockets and satellites, they'll all tell you that we're not doing crazy enough stuff. It's all just, so these big agencies are beholden to their business model, which is, there's a big long waiting list because there's only so few of them. When you put a satellite into orbit and it costs what it costs, they can tell you how much it will be and you pay it, and it's a futures financial tool really, and that's how it runs. So there's not a lot of space for innovation, and perhaps, it's a truism that the more you're confined, or the more urgent something is in the real world way, the more creative you have to become to get past those things. But I wouldn't be able to give you anything smarter than that.
But that's not true in the sense of, I don't want to blow smoke up the backside of SpaceX, but they have managed to get more cargo into orbit than anybody else by 2 orders of magnitude. So there is at least one company in the world who's innovating around the delivery model, but maybe the rest of the world.
I was talking about the agencies more.
Right. Yeah. I mean, certainly the space agency model has been disrupted by private enterprise. I guess I don't know how much we know about what China's doing, other than it is doing its own space stuff and doing it as successfully as you'd expect them to be doing it, and probably would be ahead of America substantially if not for SpaceX's ability to put things in space incredibly reliably and cheaply relative to the previous costs. Right. Any other questions that we can actually answer? Go for it.
Not sure if you'll have the answer, but I have been to China once, and it was back in 2019, and I also thought WeChat was amazing. All the different things that you've outlined, it just made everything so much easier, and including translating Chinese into English on menus and so on and so forth, and making it possible for micro businesses to be paid very easily. So the sort of rural Chinese person on their bicycle with all the stuff hanging on would be accepting payments by WeChat. I just wondered if you knew how WeChat was developed, where it kind of came from, and how on earth it managed. I imagine that most people in China use WeChat.
Yeah.
So it's an astonishing penetration.
Yeah.
But I just wondered if you knew what its history was, or.
Not exactly, sorry, but it is pretty much cobbled together from the different kind of social platforms that were kicking about at the time. So WhatsApp, Snapchat. Sorry.
Well, can I just comment on that? Were you the developer of WeChat? Okay, so can I make a comment on that? I don't know if this is true, but what's in my head when you ask that is that they lent into QR codes much more aggressively than over here. QR codes were a kind of like embarrassing technology in the West for a bunch of time. And then I think it was like wholeheartedly adopted in WeChat as a kind of completely frictionless way to integrate mobile in the real world. And I don't know if that's the reason why it took off, but I think that's a reason why it couldn't have taken off in the UK or the West at the same time, because we used to look at QR codes as a sort of embarrassing dead technology. And then they just had their renaissance here as well. But they've been built in since the start, I believe, in WeChat. It's very QR code driven. So there's maybe a reason why it was able to bridge basically every commercial situation, because it's trivially easy to put a QR code, to print it out and put it on anything. So
again, feeling about WeChat creation as well. 2013, first time I lived in China, WeChat, pretty great. I think it was QQ, which was a messaging app, similar to like AIN that we had in the West. And they wanted to challenge their own services. So they rolled out to like walkie-talkie thing. So essentially a big challenge in China is being able to type Chinese characters. They use a phonetic version. And suddenly the ability to send voice notes was just very, very disruptive. And that's how they got started with WeChat, was called WeChat at the time. But essentially, it was just a company just wanted to disrupt their own app and doing messaging differently.
Wow. Yeah, and it's just one of these cases where it's just functionally very, very good. So people used it a lot, and it solved more and more problems, and it's just grown out to. I'm not quite sure why that meant that there wasn't room for lots of kind of vertical solutions, which is what the West solutions. Do you have an answer?
That the WeChat functionality was developed at a time when you could bring all the models that worked very quickly and clone them. Subsequently, they've developed their own very innovative technologies. There was a phase cloning that existed in the West. And then the second one would be, if something was as big as WeChat in the West, competition law would come into play, and it would be actively broken up. In China, it suits the needs of the Chinese government. It gives a single platform to know what everybody is doing.
Yeah, that's a great point, because you can actually see the bits where it was easy, and then the innovation that's built on top of it. So again, all the ugly stuff looks like 2015 or 2016, and then you've got all this new stuff that looks pristine and amazing. Sorry, sir.
I'm just going to ask two completely different questions. First one was, how are the entrepreneurial companies funded in China? What is the difference between that and the UK? And the second one was, having come back from China and seen lots of things that were there, what changes are you making to what you're doing with Codebase in order to try and promote more Scottish entrepreneurial startups?
Yeah, okay, wow, those are really good questions.
Do you know how Chinese companies are funded?
So I can't give you like a definitive, brilliant sort of expert answer, but I did meet a bunch of investment vehicles there. So there's a lot of state money, obviously, as you can imagine, but there's also a lot of money that's kind of based around Singapore, and in the vicinity there's met a lot of Japanese people there as well. So there's that's another thing that really surprised me. So I love Japan. I've been to Japan a bunch of times, and Japan, the street in Japan is dominated by three brands essentially. You've got Family Mart, Lawson's, and 7-Eleven as so-called kombini. They're all over the place, little shops, and it's the same in China. It's the same three brands, which was like kind of mind blowing to me. So I think there's state money, There's also money from the sort of Asia Pac vicinity, and there's also, so this is secondhand information, but I met a person there who was an Indian researcher at the local university who turned out to be from Glasgow. And he was saying that China's got two speeds, essentially. One speed is the state, alongside professional investor class, puts lots of money into the market, lets it grow, and then it stops it, takes the money back out and redistributes it in a countrywide kind of piece. So you've got that interplay between those kind of more private investors, but always kind of cornerstoned by the state. And he was saying that at the moment in China, you've got so people might remember that, oh God, what's his name? The Alibaba founder. Yeah, was kind of like not in the public eye for a while, now he's kind of back. That's one of those moments of the speed changing from make money to distribute money, make money, distribute money. And what I heard was at the moment, it's the entrepreneur class is worried that they want to go into the make money moment, but it's actually the government are kind of putting the brakes and doing the distributing money thing. I'm not an economist. The guy I spoke to he was saying the main reason for that was the real estate question, that the house prices have just.
I think there has been a crackdown on big tech in China. I think I wrote this down since the 2020 to 2023, $1.1 trillion was wiped off the valuations of Chinese big tech because of policies by the CCP that were kind of going the sort of like let's bring this back in. I mean, the three big legs of it were, one, capitalist excess, so let's sort of control some of that excess capitalism. Another one was one of their data security things, concerns that they're not got enough command and control over some of what the technology companies are doing. And the third one was a kind of antitrust crackdown as well, anti-competitive behavior within the Chinese economy itself. You know, whether that's true, because this is all people from the outside kind of commenting on what's going on inside China, but it you know, how they get funded, I think, is capitalism inside China by some sources. I don't know if that's internal or external funds, but presumably there are some pretty wealthy Chinese capitalists now. And if the state lets them, then they'll go and be wealthy Chinese capitalists some more. And when they don't, I guess they'll do something different.
Yeah. I think that makes sense. But it's also interesting to point out that roughly in that period of time, the same kind of happened in the West.
It is, but there's a
for different reasons.
Yeah, for different reasons.
But we had a period of like super low interest rates, free money essentially sloshing about, building lots of startups, and then that money completely dried up, completely disappeared, and those startups that were funded, mostly software as a service startups, almost as a class, have been chopped really hard.
There's a kind of disillusionment in Chinese society just now, which again we're not particularly exposed to. There's two themes. One's involution, so life's meaningless rat race. So a lot of young people in China are kind of being like, this is all completely pointless. And this other one is they call it lying flat, or whatever the Chinese name is for lying flat, which means basically just giving up on that rat race. So there's a kind of cultural thing, which is look at all these extremely successful tech businesses making tons and tons of money, and then look at my life, which is kind of a grind. So I mean, that's, you know, culturally we also have it here, but that is Western commentators on China are remarking that might be part of the reason why there's been a bit of a pushback by central government, because of course there's always the politics of China going on over everything else about, you know, we've got to make sure that people don't get too dissatisfied, because that's definitely not what they want to be happening.
I guess, sorry.
Oh, sorry, it was just another question.
Okay, just quickly to your second question. The big thing about what to do with Codebase is, and this is really, really hard to articulate, but I think there's a bunch of startup mythology that said you could be a kind of high school dropout or college dropout, the kind of Bill Gates, Steve Jobs model, and you could code from your garage and do all that kind of stuff. I think that's over. And I think being in China, the thing that's probably good news for the universities is I think building startups now are more sort of deep tech focused, more you got to finish your degree and know some stuff and then build a startup. I think there's going to be more of that, and I think that's pretty like a good bet. We've got loads of evidence for it. So for us, we're trying to build programs that cater to that. So, what does a founder look like? And it's can you get that human capital that's been highly educated, and can you storytell and incentivize these people to build companies rather than do a postdoc or join a big company. That's the one big thing we're trying to do more of. So that would be the kind of.
And is that because of the death of SaaS, or is that because of AI coming, or what's
multi-causal? But the Chinese thing was just like the nail in the coffin, because we just met so many people from other countries as well discussing the same thing again and again, and then seeing, okay, can we iterate around that 0 to 1 moment? Can we say we've got all this cool research, so what can we do with it? And have a bit of optimism and a bit of energy momentum to sort of build around it.
So stay in school, kids. That's your message. Right. Maybe one last question. And yep.
My question was about ecosystem building, and the terms you used were communitarian and libertarian.
Yeah.
And I presume you mean there's a spectrum from one side through to the other. Your position as a ecosystem builder, does that force you to take a communitarian approach, or can you, from your position, provide a mix of incentives?
A really, really good question. I'll try and answer that with an anecdote. So we're in our 2nd year now of running the program, and one of the key feedback moments at the end of the 1st year was that the worry we had that several people didn't want to build a company, they wanted to join Codebase. And that was that arch kind of outcome of being super communitarian and super nice and kind and everyone's awesome and let's do this cool stuff. So we've tried to kind of counteract a little bit and be a little bit more libertarian this time. We've literally just had the opening session of our first programs of this year, where we're trying to gently say, hey, it's really cool to have ambition, it's really cool to do big things, but it's actually, we're a kind of mirror of society in that sense. Like the ecosystems that are built reflect the kind of mores and the kind of acceptable stuff around us. And there's just, I'm kind of scared of saying this stuff out loud, to be honest, right now. Like I always worry that we're scared of building big things. It's a difficult thing, and if you build them, some people think, that's not cool, we shouldn't do that, and you should just be focused on equality or.
Is it okay to make money in Scotland, Stephen?
Artisan coffee.
Yeah. So my hope. So in Glasgow, there's a secondhand bookstore called Burning House Books, and I look at that thing and think about the creativity, the reference to, Sherlock Holmes and what book would you take out of their house if it's burning and all the. But it's like it's a place that creates tens of thousands of pounds, and there's almost a question of like doing something that does tens of thousands is totally fine, everyone loves it. Hundreds of thousands, brilliant. Millions, absolutely. Hundreds of millions, you start to get people get weird. If this thing does billions or whatever, it's already kind of like, that's not cool. And that's a genuine, I think I'm kind of qualified to say that, because genuinely, one thing I do is meet loads and loads of startups, and that's a thing I think we really need to work at. And again, that sounds unpalatable right now. I'm growing up in Germany, you've got your social market economy. That's the big thing. So you want both. You want the European thing is you want to have people make money, but you want to have a nice life for people, and justice and fairness and accessibility and equality and all those, diversity, inclusion, all these things, which is super, super important. But my worry is that we just always want to build really tiny things that don't actually make that happen. You have to have, again, maybe this leaves economics and goes into politics really quickly, but I believe in I see the world as like big pumps of money and drains of money, and we need some big pumps, otherwise I'm worried that we're sitting on
a big drain.
Money we made a long, long time ago, and it is, there's much less of it there than we think there is. And that's the bit that worries me. But that's the Europe being a museum thing again.
And what do you think? Do you think an ecosystem has to lead on this, or do you think it just has to reflect the culture of the society that it builds in?
Well, I guess I'd say ecosystem has to lead on finding the founders that are driven to create the large companies. It's very difficult to do because often those sorts of people don't want to be part of a club. But nevertheless, anything that can encourage those people, and I'm sure there are many things that you're doing that are, I can tell you, helping them to do that.
I can tell you the one hook for those people. So I totally agree with you. It's almost like a kind of self-selection for the coolest, most ambitious. Think the communitarian stuff's the worst, so they stay away. But the one thing we've managed to do, I think, a really good job of, is connect those people to other ecosystems. So we have a program that we run with partners in Silicon Valley called Reforge. And I don't need any help. This is just our Darwinian game. The government, should stay away, and they'll all do this program. And some of these people are friends, right? So I'm not criticizing them. I get it. I really do. I built stuff in the past. I had no government money or didn't think it was good, etc., etc. But I think you're trying to come up with a modern version that's cognizant of this stuff and says, look, the thing we can help you with, we'll do. Everything else, we'll just stay away. That's fine. But there are other people who do need help. They do need, mentorship. They do need people to open their eyes to possibilities and all these kind of things. Also, the other thing to really say, I think ecosystems are really driven by playbooks, and playbooks do help. I'm a believer in that. I think that's uncontroversial. Like that whole Techstars thing of like do more faster. I think that's real. But at the same time, you don't want to do the cradle to the grave kind of IPO type. We'll hold your hand all the way there. For sure, that's the wrong way.
But part of it is also about creating the ambition in the country to create more entrepreneurs so that more people step forward, of which a very small number will probably be the type of people who can go on and create really big things. But you got to sort of see it a little bit, haven't you?
For sure.
And we haven't necessarily in the past been as good in this country at doing that.
I've got this silly thing what I'll call the difference between systemic and totemic. So in the last we had totemic people help. And this is trying to do some kind of systemization. So some kind of systemic way of doing that. To saying, here's a bunch of infrastructure. It's super lean, right? It's not tons of money and it's not tons of stuff. But it's like, can we expose people to playbooks, to meetups, all that kind of stuff, and to people who've done it before? Or my metaphor for this is like, those old maps from the Middle Ages where you had, if you navigated the world, you could sort of draw lines around the islands you'd seen and stuff. And where you hadn't been, you would draw dragons and you would say, well, there be dragons, right? So essentially you're trying to meet people who've drawn the map wider, have slain those dragons and have got more stuff to colour in with lines. And that's what Reforge would do, or meeting people who've been further on this journey. And I think that's a fairly uncontroversial thing. It's just at the very beginning, the top of the funnel, where you're trying to create more people, you just have to have a bunch of stuff. But the more it goes on later on, it's like, it's many to many, but then it becomes, there's a natural drop off. Building companies is a 90% failure game. It's just what it is. So you got to create rails for people to come back into the game, to fail and take a job with the thing that works, for the thing that works to buy some of the companies that didn't make it, etc., etc. So
as long as you don't introduce a kind of filter that filters out the successful few who get through, then
no, it's super light touch, and it's driven by people who've done it, like to varying degrees of success. But we're just trying to bring in people who've done that stuff, who see other people who might become angel investors or whatever, and wish, if they only knew these three things, or that's the kind of position we're taking.
Good. All right. Well, listen, thank you very much. I don't know if you want to say a few words. Thank you for your answer, Steven.
So just left for me to thank both Steven and Matt. It's been a fascinating whirlwind tour of so many subjects. I've definitely learned so much tonight and so much to go away and think about. I really do thank both of you for giving up your time. It's much appreciated. And to the business school for hosting us tonight. It's been lovely. There are drinks and we can carry on the conversation outside in the reception. So please do join us. Both Stephen and Matt will be around for a bit if you've got questions you didn't manage to ask. I promised Rachel I would mention that Matt is an alumni of the business school. So if there's any alumni questions, please do ask him those as well. Just to keep it even, because we like things to be like that. Stephen is an alumni of Glasgow, so Edinburgh and Glasgow both represented here. Thank you to all of you that have come. If you've not been to a David Hume Institute event before, we have events regularly that are thought-provoking and on all different elements of the economy and how it relates to society. At the moment, we're also, we've just started a new venture called The Economy in Plain English, which broadcasts live on multiple channels, not WeChat at the moment. But it picks up online if you're interested in talking more about the economy in plain English. And thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks a lot.